You ever been in one of those situations where you think, this can't be real, right? That was me last year during our school lockdown. It was supposed to be a regular Tuesday, but it turned into something out of a nightmare. It started in the cafeteria. It was lunchtime, and the room was full of the usual chaos. Kids chatting, the clattering of trays, and that weird smell of cafeteria food. I was sitting with my friends, just messing around and trying to avoid eating the mystery meat on my plate. Then, over the loudspeaker, a voice came through, shaky and tense.
Attention all students and staff. We are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill.
At first, we didn't take it seriously. I mean, who does, right? We thought it was just another practice or someone playing a prank. But then, the doors to the cafeteria slammed shut, and Mr. Grayson, the janitor, bolted them from the outside. His face was pale, and he looked scared out of his mind. We all went quiet. The only sounds were the murmurs of confusion and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. I remember looking at my friends and seeing the same fear in their eyes that I felt. Something was wrong. Really wrong. The teachers tried to keep us calm, but their voices were trembling. They herded us into the corner of the cafeteria away from the doors and windows. We all crouched down, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast, and the pounding of my heart in my ears. That's when we heard it, the sound of someone banging on the cafeteria doors. It was loud and frantic, like they were desperate to get in. The banging stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then we heard a voice, a man's voice, angry and unhinged.
Let me in. I know you're in there.
I almost lost it. It wasn't a voice I recognized. Whoever it was, they sounded dangerous. The teachers whispered for us to stay quiet, not to make a sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself invisible. The voice got louder, more insistent.
You can't hide from me. I'll find you.
Then came the sound of metal scraping against metal. I peeked through my fingers and saw the tip of a knife blade slipping through the crack between the doors. The man was trying to force his way in. One of the teachers, Mrs. Collins, pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She whispered into the phone, explaining the situation, her voice barely audible over the thudding of my heart. Minutes felt like hours. The knife blade disappeared and we heard footsteps moving away from the doors. But we knew he was still out there, somewhere in the school, looking for a way in. The air was thick with fear and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the direction of the kitchen. We all jumped, our eyes wide with terror. The man had found another way in. The teachers motioned for us to stay put, but I could see the panic in their eyes. They had no idea what to do. The sound of footsteps echoed through the cafeteria as the man moved closer. I could see his shadow on the wall, distorted and disturbing. He was muttering to himself, something about making them pay. My mind raced with questions. Who was he and what did he want? And why our school? Then he stepped into view. He was tall, with wild eyes and a crazed look on his face. His clothes were dirty and torn, and in his hand he clutched a large, gleaming Bowie knife. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I forced it down, knowing that making any noise could get us killed. The man crept through the cafeteria, his eyes scanning the room. He seemed to know we were hiding somewhere, and he was determined to find us. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see us. But then he stopped. His eyes locked onto our hiding spot, and a twisted smile spread across his face. He started walking toward us, his grip on the knife tightening. I felt a hand grab mine, squeezing it hard. It was my friend Jenna. Her eyes were wide with fear, and I could feel her trembling. Just when I thought it was all over, we heard the distant wail of sirens. The man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. The police were finally here. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a new wave of fear. The man looked enraged, like a cornered animal. He knew his time was running out, and he was getting desperate. He turned back to us, raising the knife.
"You're not getting away!"
He screamed, charging toward us. But before he could reach us, the cafeteria doors burst open and armed police officers stormed in, their weapons aimed at the man. "Drop the weapon," one of the officers shouted. The man hesitated for a moment, then let out a crazy scream and lunged at the officers. They fired, and the man dropped to the floor, the knife dropping out of his hand. Everything after that was a blur. The police rushed in, pulling us to safety, checking to make sure everyone was okay. I felt numb, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. We were all in shock, but we were alive. They took us out of the school, and I remember the sunlight feeling too bright, too real. Parents were waiting outside, their faces etched with worry. I saw my mom, and I ran to her, collapsing into her arms. I finally let the tears come, shaking with sobs as she held me tight. The man, we later found out, was a former student who had a grudge against the school and some students. He'd been planning the attack for weeks. It was a miracle no one was hurt, but the terror of that day stayed with us all. Even now, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, hearing his voice, seeing his crazed eyes. It was the scariest day of my life, and it's something I'll never forget. It was just a regular Thursday, the kind where you drag yourself through the routine, counting down the minutes until the final bell. I was sitting in third period math class, doodling in my notebook and half listening to Mr. Johnson drone on about algebraic equations. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual hum of teenage chatter mixed with the occasional scraping of chairs and clicking of pens. But then the loudspeaker crackled to life. It was the principal's voice, but he sounded different, tense, and urgent.
"Attention students and staff, this is a lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately."
My heart skipped a beat. We had lockdown drills before, but there was something in his voice that made the air feel thick and heavy. Mr. Johnson quickly locked the door and motioned for us to get under our desks. The room went silent, except for the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged in my ears. We waited, but time seemed to stand still. My mind was racing. What was going on? Was it a shooter, a bomb threat? No one knew, and the not knowing was the worst part. Then we heard it. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. Slow, deliberate steps. Someone was walking down the hall, and they weren't in a hurry. I could see the fear in my classmates' eyes. Sarah, who sat next to me, was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Jake, the class clown, wasn't smiling anymore. I tried to steady my breathing, but it felt like my chest was being squeezed in a vice. The footsteps got closer. They were right outside our door now. We all held our breath, praying that whoever it was would just keep walking. But they didn't. The doorknob rattled, and I thought I might pass out from the fear. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. Mr. Johnson motioned for us to stay quiet, but I could see the sweat on his forehead. The doorknob stopped rattling, and for a moment I thought maybe they'd moved on. But then came the knocking, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent.
Let me in.
A voice called from the other side. It was low and calm, almost friendly, but there was something off about it.
I just want to talk.
No one moved. The knocking continued, relentless.
Come on, open up. I know you're in there.
My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I glanced at Sarah, who had tears streaming down her face. Jake was biting his lips so hard I thought he might draw blood. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. There was a long, eerie silence, and then we heard it, a scratching sound, like fingernails on a chalkboard. It was coming from the door, moving slowly, methodically.
Please,
The voice said again, softer now.
I just want to play.
The scratching continued, and I felt like I might scream. It went on for what felt like forever, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We waited, the tension in the room so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we heard the footsteps again, moving away this time. We all let out the breath we didn't know we were holding. Mr. Johnson motioned for us to stay put, and we did, too afraid to move or speak. It felt like hours before the loudspeaker crackled again.
Attention students and staff, the lockdown is over. You may return to your normal activities.
Normal activities? How were we supposed to act normal after that? We slowly got up from our hiding spots, everyone looking shaken and pale. Mr. Johnson unlocked the door and we all filed out into the hallway, eyes darting around nervously. We never found out who it was or what they wanted. The police came and searched the school, but there was no sign of the person who had terrorized us. They said it was probably just a prank, but we all knew better. Something changed that day. The school didn't feel safe anymore. Every time I walked down those hallways, I could still hear the footsteps, the knocking, the scratching. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear that voice, whispering in the dark.
Let me in. I just want to play.
You know those days when everything feels off right from the start? That was today. I woke up late, spilled coffee on my shirt, and missed the bus. By the time I got to school, I was already in a foul mood, and then it happened. It was during fourth period English class when the principal made an announcement over the intercom.
Attention all students and staff. We are now under lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately.
My heart skipped a beat. You hear about these things, but you never think it's going to happen at your school. Mrs. Green rushed to lock the door and turn off the lights, her face pale. We all ducked under our desks, the room suddenly feeling like a coffin. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was the need to escape, maybe just plain bad luck, but I felt the sudden urge to use the bathroom. It was like I'd lost my mind or something. I got up and kinda ran to the door, unlocked it, and slipped out to go to the bathroom before anyone could say anything. My heart was pounding in my chest as I made my way down the hallway, crouching as I moved. The hallways were eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I reached the bathroom, pushed the door open, and slipped inside. The bathroom was empty, thank God. I went into the farthest stall and locked it, hoping this would be quick. But then I heard it. The bathroom door creaked open again, the sound echoing off the tiles. My breath hitched. I could hear someone's slow, deliberate footsteps.
Hello?
A voice called out, soft but chilling.
Is someone in here?
I didn't answer. I could see the shadow of feet under the stall door, moving slowly from one end of the bathroom to the other. My heart was in my throat. Whoever it was, they were looking for someone. I slowly and quietly peeked through a crack in the stall, and I saw him. Black combat boots, black pants, black hoodie. He was dressed in all black. My blood ran cold. He walked up to each stall, pushing each door open, each stall door slamming against the wall. I curled up on the toilet seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped outside my stall. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. Then a big bang. My stall door shook but didn't open. I had locked it, and it was the only thing between me and whoever was out there.
I know you're in there.
He whispered, in a quiet, creepy way.
Come out and play.
I stayed silent, my body trembling. He kicked the door, harder this time. The lock rattled, but it held.
Come on.
He said, his voice turning angry.
Don't make this hard.
I could hear him pacing outside the stall, muttering to himself, and then silence. I strained to hear any movement, but there was nothing. Maybe he had left. Maybe I was safe. I waited for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. Slowly, I stood up and peeked through the small crack between the door and the stall. The bathroom seemed empty. I pushed the door open a fraction and then a bit more. The coast was clear. I let out a shaky breath and stepped out of the stall. That's when I saw it, in the mirror, behind me. The figure in black, standing perfectly still. I whipped around, but it was too late. He lunged at me, a flash of silver in his hand. I screamed, raising my arms to defend myself. The blade slashed my arm, pain exploding where it cut. I stumbled back into the stall, slamming the door shut and locking it again. I pressed my bleeding arm against my shirt, trying to stop the flow of blood. He pounded on the door, screaming in rage. I was trapped. Then, the bathroom door burst open.
Police, drop the weapon.
A large amount of voices filled the bathroom. Then the man in black turned toward them, the police yelling commands. Shots rang out and he dropped to the floor, the knife clattering away. I stayed in the stall, too scared to move, until a police officer gently coaxed me out. They took me to the nurse's office where paramedics patched up my arm and the police asked a million questions. It was over. The lockdown ended and the psycho was caught. But the fear, that stayed with me. Even now, every time I walk past that bathroom, I get chills. I can still hear those footsteps, still feel that cold, creeping dread. School isn't supposed to be a place of terror, but that day, it was, and I'll never forget it.